Welcome to The Bone, the podcast that goes deeper. Here we cut through the noise and get straight to the core of the issues that matter. From real stories to raw truths, we dive deep into the conversations that shape our world and challenge our thinking. We're not afraid to dig in and get to the marrow of it all. Whether it's life, culture, or business in sports medicine, we're here to break it down raw and real. No filters, no fluff, just to the bone. With your host, Shelby Daly, we're getting to the bone. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Bone, an athletic training podcast with your host, Shelby Daly, ATC. I'm the guy that helps out. I think I have a mop somewhere around here. But today, we got some exciting stuff going on. We have a guest, currently director of Academy for Teaching and Learning at Baylor University. And apparently an automotive journalist, which explains why I'm in the garage today. Who do we have with us today, Shelby?
We have Toby Brooks. He has a range of job experiences from his LinkedIn profile, but he is an athletic trainer, so he met the qualifications to be on the podcast.
So a question I came up with while I was looking at the skeleton that you sent me is, every athletic trainer has a sport in their background. They were doing something before they ended up in the ATC professional side of sports. So what was the sport you were mad about?
Well, I grew up in Southern Illinois, teeny tiny high school, and I would have gladly played football. I'm now in Texas, and it doesn't even, people can't even process that there was a high school without a football team. So basketball was really my only option. But I did play basketball, pursued it briefly in college, and ended up pursuing sports medicine as a way to stay in touch with that love for athletics.
Oh, absolutely. Well, very good. Very good. All right. So today, without upsetting any of your clients, what is your favorite sport to be an AT for?
That's a good one. I've worked mostly with football, and I certainly loved that. My first job out of undergrad, back when ATs could be certified as undergrads, was at the University of Arizona with women's gymnastics. And when they offered me the spot at Arizona, they had 3 GA ships, and they hired 3 of us, and they said, we have a spot with football, we have a spot with volleyball, we have a spot with gymnastics, and once we get to know you all after the first week, we will assign you. And I thought, oh, that's awesome. I'm sure I'll get the football job. If I don't, volleyball would be great. God, don't give me gymnastics. And I was told after the fact that they had kind of pigeonholed me for gymnastics to begin with.
Because you look like a gymnast.
No, I think some of the things I had to say about just athlete welfare and kind of whole person development. A lot of gymnasts are coming in. I mean, college gymnastics in particular is not like a lot of college sports where there's really nowhere for these girls to go pro. Many of them, their peak years are behind them, and they're coming in oftentimes physically broken, but also psychologically broken from overbearing coaches. And they're trying to kind of come to terms with what the sport has meant to them. For many of them, they've been doing it since as long as they can remember. And so it was really eye-opening. I still have great relationships with many of those athletes who I now count as friends, and seeing what they're doing as wives and mothers has just been tremendous.
Now, along the way, with the love of football, you did some indoor football. Is that correct?
I did. I spent a season in Arena 2, which doesn't exist anymore, with the Florida Firecats, which don't exist anymore. I often tell my students it was probably the funnest job I ever had because it was AF2. Most of them worked at Home Depot during the day.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm in Florida, so my family, our daughter was a little over 2, year and a half at the time. My wife wasn't working, so we would just go to the beach every morning. I mean, what athletic trainer gets to go hang out on the beach? But all my patients had jobs, and they couldn't do treatments and stuff. So I would be on the beach in the morning, show up at the facility, which was an ice arena that they would convert to an indoor football stadium, and basically do treatments and practices every day from 3 till 9 or 10 at night.
I mean, I'm from Alaska, and I've never had turf as cold as an arena football on top of ice. Oh, my God. Well, Shelby was with the LA Kiss. So was that the same league as yours?
I think that was the first league.
Yeah.
So,
Oh, okay.
we had Gene Simmons running around and,
I gotta say, for a halftime show, an LA Kiss game is hard to beat. I mean, oh my goodness.
A lot of
All right.
rock and roll.
Yes, there was a lot of rock and roll. And then you also you're outside of AT athletic training. You're also an automotive journalist, which is why I'm in the garage with the cars today.
Sure. Well, what I discovered is that a career in athletic training really sets you up for success if you go get any other job because you feel like you're working part-time. So I went from 7 days a week for months on end and, not making much money to when I pivoted into education, teaching full-time really meant 40 hours. And so I started picking up some extra work on the side.
Found out you had 40 extra hours in the week to do something, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Outstanding.
What's your favorite car?
That one's a complicated one too. It's election season, so I'm giving you very political answers. The first car that I was involved in building, my dad was a heavy diesel mechanic, and he bought an old 72 Nova that was rotted out all over, full of Bondo, and had an anemic 350. I think it was probably even a 305. Basically, everything we were told about the car turned out to be a lie. So he ended up ripping the quarter panels off, new fenders, new hood, and I used to say we built it. He built it, and I stood around and watched as a 10-year-old. So that was kind of cool. I really got into the sport truck scene heavily when I was in high school and college. So lowered old body style Chevys, airbags, that kind of thing. I was a stereo installer for a time. So even now I've got a little Honda Civic with a couple of Rockford 12s in the back and underbody neons and all that kind of thing.
All the good stuff. All right. Very cool. Well, I'm a car guy too, like from way back. And so that's actually how the kids got their names. So you're looking at Shelby, obviously. And then the red one behind me is an Austin. So I have one Austin, I have one Shelby. If I had a boy, it was going to be a Tucker. That was the deal. That's
cool.
Yeah. So you're in athletic training now. You're in the education side of it. And your kind of go-to is there's other ways of making money than what we might traditionally think about as a monetary plan for an AT. Give us a little bit of what that's about.
Yeah, I think where our paths crossed is last week I posted just on a whim. I had a couple of students contact me. I've taught for off and on, the better part of 20 years. So I've got a pretty expansive number of students who are out in the field. And I got some concerning messages from a couple of different people, different cohort. It wasn't like they were talking to each other. It was just unsolicited. And they were experiencing the same thing I had experienced previously, where they were just burned out. They weren't making financially what they thought they were worth. There was just this pressure. And I think athletic training, historically, we have undermarketed ourselves. We have undercut our skill set and what we can offer to an athletics department in particular, when I'm talking about the traditional setting in colleges. And we don't advocate for ourselves. We are taught to be behind the scenes and not to raise a stink and to do what we're told and to anticipate things before they're a problem. And that's great for everybody else, but it really works to our detriment. So at some point, most of the students that I've worked with, I know I have, you kind of get to this point where you're like, well, if I were on Wall Street working 80 hours a week and pulling down 7 figures, I could justify that I'm doing this for my family. Or if I worked 20 hours a week, but I didn't make much money and I was really pouring into them, or if I'm a stay-at-home dad, I could justify that. But the fact of the matter is I'm killing myself 80 hours a week, picking up the phone in the middle of the night to answer a student athlete who wants you to make them a dentist appointment. My family's suffering from my time, and I'm not killing it financially either. And at some point, we all kind of have this come to Jesus thought with ourselves, like, am I really cut out for this? This isn't what I thought it was going to be. Wearing team gear and telling all my friends I work in pro sports only goes so far.
I remember a certain AT being a bit frustrated when she was so excited about working the X Games. And this was a big deal, national events, people you recognize from television, and whoa! And the entire comp package was, hey, we've got some overstocked sneakers that might be your size. Here you go. Rock and roll. You can have, the ones with the flowers that didn't move.
Yeah. I think that was the US Open of surfing.
Oh, was that okay.
Yeah. But yeah, that was, volunteering for your time for stuff. Nothing really other than the experience. Obviously, it was cool seeing some of the injuries. Somebody bashed their head and we had to spine board them out of the bowl. But other than that, I don't know if that really advanced me professionally either.
Yeah.
Well, they always sell it. And I used to run into this when I was active in film, because they kind of get you at the same hook. Hey, man, it's about exposure and networking. And so here, do this monologue. We're not going to pay you, but you might get to see Kristen Bell on set. It's stuff like that. So, ATs, I think, tip of the hat that there's this awakening coming. What are you seeing besides, I don't want to get everybody excited about being automotive journalists and creating an over demand for services and a decrease in comp for you. What are you seeing as other avenues for ATs to become, tweak that income hours balance?
Yeah. Well, sadly, I'm a former automotive journalist. COVID really decimated the print magazine industry, and I was an art director and a contributor as a tech editor for a publication out of Canada. And once COVID happened, they lost their advertising base basically overnight. I mean, we were in an unprecedented time. These companies were laying off their entire workforce. They're like, we don't know if we're going to be able to get toilet paper and hand sanitizer next week. We sure can't be spending money on advertising in a magazine that may or may not ever make it to a newsstand where people don't shop. So, I mean, it evaporated overnight. And this was a steady stream of $3,000+ a month. I was making more side hustling for this magazine than I made as the head football athletic trainer when I was working in clinical practice.
Right.
And so when that went away, that was kind of an eye opener that I needed to diversify. I think the beauty of the athletic training skill set is we are Jacks and Jills of all trades. We the same person that can run an electronic medical record is the person that's repairing the water caddy that has to pump water. I mean, you have to be diverse in your skill set. And I think a lot of my students don't recognize just how marketable that is. And again, we're taught to be quiet and to anticipate the needs of others, but never, you're not going to find an athletic trainer on the cover of the media guide, nor would most even want to be there if you offered it to them. We are a behind the scenes profession. And because of that, I think I always go back to the old mantra that we teach people how to treat us. And if I'm letting a coach call me at 3 a.m. to tell me that, hey, that flavor of Zone Bar that you got for me last time is wrong, get the Gatorade. And I do it. I just taught them that it's okay to call me at 3 a.m. and treat me that way. Yeah. And so I think what I'm seeing is if you can muster up the courage that it takes, if you feel like you're truly in a situation that's unsustainable, and pull yourself out of that the work ethic and the skill set that you have really does translate over into a lot of different things. And even if you don't know it now, like when I first got into this magazine thing, I had learned Photoshop because I was too cheap to pay somebody to do my website. And from that, a local magazine printer said, hey, if you know how to do Photoshop, could you do this software called InDesign? It's what you use to lay out magazines. I'm like, I could probably figure it out. And so I spent basically a weekend watching YouTube tutorials on how to do InDesign. And the next week I had a job laying out a magazine for this little local magazine. A year later, that gets parlayed over into an international magazine that's on, that's on newsstands in 34 countries. So that stick-to-itiveness, the resourcefulness, lots of times we have to figure out ways to do things with no funds as ATs. That's an incredibly marketable skill, and it can serve us really, really well.
Well, and the other thing that when you get right down to it, it's portable. I mean, being an athletic trainer is 100% portable revenue stream because it follows you. It's in between your ears. And if you decide that there is well, going back to your Canadian background, that there are other sports besides hockey that you'd like to be involved in, you can pick up and leave Calgary and go someplace else where, oh my God, there's beach football or beach volleyball or anything that's on a beach. So yeah, it's 100% portable, which is so valuable, but we don't always give it credit for that.
I have a former student who works for the Department of Transportation. She basically helps coordinate contracts. I mean, if you're able to balance an athletic department with 17 different sports with head and assistant coaches, like you're a logistics wizard if you can make that happen. And you can apply that. And she's probably making triple what she made at a high school as an athletic trainer, working a hard set 40 hours a week.
So I was reading another book outside of the book club, and we may cover this one in the future, but it's knowing the why. The whole book is talking about the why. And so it's why do you get into it? And in one particular chapter, they were talking about exactly what you were saying. There's the A individuals in a company and the B individuals in a company. So if you look at Elon Musk, there's a car guy for you. Some would argue, but he's building cars. Elon Musk is an A guy, all right? He did not build the first Tesla Roadster. There were some guys doing some development off a Lotus chassis. They put it all together. At that point, Elon had some money. He went in and bought the company. And so he's the A guy that's out in front and making all the motions. But behind him, there's a whole bunch of B guys who actually know how to do things. And that's, as you describe it, where the athletic trainer falls in is, they're not the coach that gets all the time, all the camera angles on the sideline during the game. I remember cheering for a certain athletic trainer when they were on ESPN, the Ocho, ESPN something, and I was like, hey, and I started counting how many times I got to see my kid on camera, and there was 13 instances where either somebody got hit and she had to run out on the field, or they would pan. And I knew what she looked like, so you never recognize her because the camera was panning. But I was like, oh, that's where the ATs sit. That's my kid. So 13 times on ESPN. But yes, coach is an A guy, the quarterback's an A guy, but there's a whole bunch of B guys that actually make the wheels turn.
I like that. I would also push back on that a little bit and say there's no reason athletic trainers can't be A guys and gals, because balancing athlete healthcare in 2024 is, I mean, you have to move at the speed of business while operating within the speed of higher ed or a high school. I mean, it really is pulling at you from a bunch of different directions. And I think a lot of, myself included, but certainly my recent grad students, they underestimate how much work it is to stay current in today's healthcare system.
Oh,
and they're the expert. And there are places, I loved working in pro sports. I interned with the Raiders thinking that the NFL was going to be in my future. And I remember standing on that sideline. So we're in, at the time in Oakland, and we're training in Napa. And at the time, Al Davis is still the owner of the team, still alive, but his physician was based out of LA. He never changed the orthopedic group to Oakland. And so as an intern, part of our duties was to go to the airport. One of our orthopods had his private pilot's license, and he would fly into Napa. We would pick him up and take him to practice. And so I'm standing there thinking, well, hey, first of all, I had a PhD at the time. I didn't do this to be a shuttle for a physician. But secondly, I'm the intern. I'm the lowest person here in terms of the medical staff. But even if I were the head athletic trainer, there's a GP right over there. There's an orthopod right over there, sometimes two. There's, all these medical specialists. And if something happens, I don't have to be good. Whereas I've got students working at what we call six-man schools in Texas. They're so small that they play six-man football. And they're the only healthcare provider in the entire county. And they better darn well be good because they don't have anyone else to rely on. And so depending on the setting, what I discovered was really the lower your resources, the less margin for error you have. You have to be great, and you can't afford to miss anything because you don't have that margin built into your healthcare system.
Well, and that was not meant to be dismissive
Not at
of
all, not
athletic
at all.
trainers at all, because sometimes it's that realization, like you said, you get into a situation where, and we used to run into this in the Marines all the time. It's like, really? We don't have what? You want us to shoot guys, but you didn't send bullets. Really? It's one of those things. So, adapt and overcome. But that's also where you start kind of realizing that you have a muscle there that you can exercise. It's when you go to the gym, you try a new machine. It's like, oh my God, I didn't know I had a muscle there. And all of a sudden, got, oh, you know what? Yeah, if I'm going to do this, this, and this, I can do the other three things too and get the recognition and hopefully the comp.
Yeah, the old adage where elephants in the carnival, they're chained with a heavy chain to a post. And as an infant, that elephant learns that it can't move. And as it grows, eventually they don't want to lug chains around, so they tie that elephant with a rope. So the bondage, the limits are in the elephant's mind. It could pull away and move. I think a lot of us in athletic training have that same mindset where we've been kind of othered, or you can just do this thing. And after a while, you start to believe it. And if you remove yourself from that, you start to see, wait a minute, like I am so much more capable than I was being given credit for, and I'm worth more than I was being compensated for. And I will say it's been a troubling week because these two posts went a little viral, and I don't want to be castigated as the guy. My wife said today, she's like, do you want to be known as the guy that completely blew up athletic training? And I don't.
Well,
but at the same
you would
time,
not be alone. This podcast has gotten some feedback,
I
shall we say.
If it isn't serving people the way we intended, then maybe we do blow it up and rebuild it better than before, because this is unsustainable. I think my generation was willing to put up with it. We didn't know we had a voice. My students today, they've been raised their whole life to, you can be anything you want. You have a voice. You have the ability to speak into something, even if you don't have 20 years of experience. And kudos to them. I mean, if there's shame to be had, it was on us, because Shelby, you're younger than I am, so you're probably somewhere in between. We just kind of did what we were told, and I remember being told, oh, there's 200 applicants for that internship spot. If you get it, just be glad you got it. Enjoy your free polo. Hopefully it fits, and maybe we'll see you next year. And I bought that hook, line, and sinker, and that's really not how it has to be. I use this analogy. When Nick Saban retired from Alabama, we've heard for years, well, we don't pay ATs well because we'll have 200 applicants for that job. Well, how many high school coaches would have taken Nick Saban's old job? You could have gotten away with paying that at a much lower rate, but you gave millions because you recognized the value in Kalen DeBoer, and good for him. But we as ATs won't advocate for ourselves, and we feel like we really have no leverage.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that Shelby and I are, for the book club, we're actually reading through a negotiating book, because a lot of it comes down to that. Because I used to run into the same thing when I was actually I was hired as an assistant body shop trainee. So it was a Lincoln dealership, and Lincoln dealerships are famous in the Ford group for being the most particular customers. So you can imagine trying to refinish somebody's black town car and the level of, well, it better be good. Yeah. So that whole attitude. So I went to the owner of the franchise and I said, I'd like more money. He said, well, here's the deal. I said, well, my guys make a lot of money. I help them make a lot of money. They bill a lot of hours. I said, well, it's like this. There's the quarterback and he makes the most money. And then they, just as you said, they discounted it down to the point, well, you're just the support guy. All you're doing is the paperwork. It's like, really? Years later, the brain clicks and goes, really? Try getting paid without the paperwork. These guys are going to walk if I'm not doing the paperwork right. So it's that ability to negotiate and put your position out in a way that builds value and gets you, really, it comes down to some respect. They think they can get you for less because they think they can kind of disrespect you a little bit.
Absolutely.
So what about the NIL? Where does that come in on this?
Well, I mentioned that in my post, and I've had some people reach out to me and push back against that. And I understand. NIL wasn't created to be an additional revenue stream so that staffers could get paid extra. I fully understand that. But one of the excuses that I was given for years was, well, if you leave, we'll have 200 people to apply for your job, especially if you're at a Power 5 or a pro team. And that's probably not wrong. The other thing is okay, I want to be here, but this isn't sustainable. I need to make more. Well, we don't have more. Like, we're paying all we can pay. And since I really left active practice, we've seen the proliferation of things like sports analytics, where teams have entire data teams, 3 or 4 people. We've got mental health teams that didn't exist. And great. Those are both fantastic things. If we're really committed to athlete welfare, I want a behavioral health care team. If we're really committed to return to play decisions and appropriate loading, then that analytics team is important too. But I was told that we didn't have money to bump salary by 5% or even 3%, like no cost of living raises, because that's how strapped we are. And yet we build these entire new departments 5 years later. And then you get NIL thrown in, where athletics departments that, again, didn't have the money. Now suddenly these collectives have formed, and these boosters are contributing to essentially athlete salaries without contracts. And so it just kind of rubs me the wrong way that, and this is, I mean, the administrators are in a tough spot. I'm at Baylor. We're not Alabama, but we're not a smaller school. So the Power 5 schools that don't have the UT or the Alabama money are really in a spot, because you're having, with no salary cap and with no contracts, it's even more difficult to compete than it is in professional sports, where there's some leveling factors that ensures that people are using similar resources. So with NIL, it just illustrated to me that old argument that we didn't have the money holds no water. There are creative ways that we could, if we really respected what you did, and it's not just ATs. I've got equipment manager friends, strength coach friends, folks that work in media relations. I mean, athletics has abused people for the sake of having a cool job, probably as long as athletics has existed. The pay has been less than the going market rate, with the payoff being you get the satisfaction of affiliating with this team. Your business card's sexier. And I don't think this generation's willing to put up with that the way mine did.
And the other point is, just because somebody gives an objection, that objection is not necessarily valid. I went to, I owned my own company for a number of years. That's how I was able to afford college for my daughter. So, it was worth it. No. We did the whole self-employed thing. And one of the things that I was responsible for in the company was hiring. And so we always had an ad out looking for qualified people to do the technical work that we were looking for. And so I could do as many interviews as I wanted. I just didn't want a lot of the people who showed up for the interviews. So you may get 200, but I was interviewing this one person. She happened to be a female, and I was just gone through a whole bunch of training over at the job service. Like, okay, here's things you can say, and here's things you can't say. And I was being very careful. And I was like, man, I just can't ask any questions here. So I looked at her. I said, well, what's your favorite color? And it incensed her. Now, she didn't get the job, and I still don't know what was wrong with the question I asked. But out of 200 applicants, you're going to get some of those ones who are going to have a problem with no matter what you put in front of them. So, yeah, you can get 200, especially if you're in a large demographic area. I mean, in Texas, sports are huge, and there's a lot of people who want to be in sports. Doesn't mean those people should be in sports. So, yeah, you can say there's going to be a lot of people applying. But here's the other thing, especially if you're in a big school or a big organization, you're going to have to depend on HR to know what they're looking for, to know what you're looking for that person, and to be able to communicate those wants and needs. And you're going to have to go through the process, and you're going to have to go through the check marks. And here's the deal. I work here. I know how this organization works. I know what needs to be done. You can spend 2 years trying to bring somebody up to where I was 2 years ago, or you can pay me something that's fair. It will cost you less to keep me than for me to leave. Just a thought.
No, I agree. And I think what we're dealing with in college now is a seismic shift. I mean, the transfer portal, NIL, they've fundamentally changed the way athletics departments do business. And so the old argument that we just don't have the money for that, it's probably less true and simultaneously more true than it's ever been. They have more need for resources than they've ever had. In order to compete nationally, the budget basically is we need an unlimited budget so that we can throw as much money at student athletes as we possibly can and subsequently populate the best rosters. The flip side of that is they also have more resources, most than they've ever had, because they've got private donations through these collectives and such. And so we're really at a critical juncture as a profession. I think our brothers and sisters in strength and conditioning have figured it out better than we have. They've aligned more with a coaching model, their resource, their compensation, buyouts. If they get fired, they have multi-year contracts and there are payouts. That's not uncommon, especially for upper level strength and conditioning coaches. It's less common in my experience in athletic training. And again, it speaks to respect. I may literally have an athlete's life in my hands covering an event. And how is that different than a coach or an athletic director who probably won't? I mean, they're making critical decisions, yes, but they're not necessarily making life and death decisions. And if they are, who's the first person they're going to call?
Well, and I think it's now with the NIL in the mix is we're dealing with higher assets at this point, high money, $ assets. So do you want me to just come in and do the bare minimum, or do you want me to be an integral part to keeping them at the institution? So I think it's leveraging that portion of it now. Because I think the NIL's, it's going to be freaking crazy in the next year or two because they don't have any regulation, but kids are just going to walk off the field if they're not happy that day. So that puts more on the athletic trainer to, I don't want to say that we're going to baby them, but there's much more on the line, and we don't want to be the ones being the cause of somebody walking off the field.
Yeah. Shelby, you're absolutely right. It's never been more important for an athletics department to have a great culture. Because if I'm a jerk to a student athlete who's also having a bad day, they can be in the portal that afternoon.
Yeah.
And all the money invested in that 5-star athlete is out the door because there's no contract. Yeah. And they've taken that paycheck with them. And now we've got a booster that's incensed because the money they invested, like you said, in that student athlete went out the door because they had one negative interaction with me or the equipment manager or with the academic staff. So you're right. It's tough. We don't want to handle them with kid gloves, but I think why we're seeing these huge coaches step down is because they're not able to speak life into and be tough and help form life skills, because athletes will just transfer. They'll go somewhere else. They have the ability to do that. Now, that's not to paint every young athlete as being mentally soft, but they have opportunities that their predecessors didn't have a generation ago. And I would have done it. If I were a 5-star athlete and my AT came in and told me I was late and I had to be there at 5 a.m, I'd probably call around and see where I could get a better deal, where someone's a little nicer. I mean, it's human nature.
Yeah. So when it comes to revenue for the departments and stuff, you hit on a couple of things where you have some folks who are donating money or moving money into these programs. Has there been any time spent on targeting individuals to make pointed contributions to a program? I mean, there's given money to, it's kind of like nonprofits. Okay. When I give money to a nonprofit, I'm like, how much of it goes to administration and how much does it go to the thing that, if I'm trying to save puppies, how many puppies get saved? If I give you $100, is it $3 going to save the puppy and 97% overhead? Well, have we reached out to folks and said, hey, you want to support sports? Can I get you to support the people who support sports, the athletic trainers who make sure that the athletes can function? And oh my God, most of us, after being involved in athletes, are going to go do something else
Mm-hmm.
And it would be nice if we had knees to do it on.
Right. Well, I would start with this. Even though I'm at Baylor and I was at Texas Tech, I have not worked in either of those athletic departments. I have people that I know and love and respect in both of those places. And so what I'm saying now is coming more from what I've heard secondhand or what I've seen as a fan. And this is kind of nationwide. This whole NIL collective is an example of how when you remove the regulations, things spring up in a way that no one ever intended. And so NIL, if we really look at it, I mean, there was a time Jeremy Bloom was an Olympic athlete in skiing, and he was playing football at Colorado. And the NCAA basically said he was ineligible for playing football because he had taken endorsement deals for skiing. That was the level of
it's a Jim Thorpe story. It's a Jim Thorpe story.
Right. Now we've basically we've pulled all the stops out, and student athletes can get anything, that they're able to negotiate. But it's not name, image, and likeness. We have this in town. There's a fast food restaurant, and there's a student athlete on the billboard, like he's endorsing this.
Wow.
That was kind of, I think, the intent of name, image, and likeness, and it basically allowed student athletes to receive payment for their name, image, and likeness being used in marketing and promotion. What it wasn't intended for is for a group of boosters to get together, pool their money, and say, we're going to pay you just because you're on the team. Are they using their name, image, and likeness? Maybe the car dealership, they're saying we're the official Lincoln dealer of such and such athletics, but more often than not, it's just a fee for service. It's a pay for play. And that I think it's an unintended consequence that the NCAA didn't anticipate, and now they really don't have any teeth. There's no enforcement. There's no contracts. There was a story, and I won't share any specifics, but a student athlete who was a basketball player who was in the portal from a mid-major program, commanding $500,000 to go to a major program, ended up getting hurt, didn't play much, and the collective said, well, we're not going to pay you. You haven't played. Well, there's no contract, so there's nothing preventing it. So he goes on to Twitter and tweets right away that he's jumping back in the portal because they reneged on their commitment. We saw this also, this season at UNLV, where the football player basically quits on his team 3 games into the season and jumps into the portal. So the boosters, they quickly get together. This collective pays him. He stays. And they lose first round of the NCAA tournament, and he tweets from the locker room after he lost that he's in the portal again.
So it's just terrorism is what's happening.
Who holds the cards? And I don't mean to be critical. If anything, we as athletic trainers shouldn't be critical. We should be jealous because the student athletes have leverage. They have shown that they command respect. The enterprise doesn't exist without them. And they are getting, it's generations overdue, but they're getting their due. Many. Now there are, depending on the sport, you might not see any athletes get NIL. Texas Tech just signed a softball player that signed $1 million NIL deal. And I don't know the particulars of that deal, but good for her. Now you've got, like you said, an asset, $1 million athlete. And if that athlete is mishandled, there are going to be consequences.
Well, that's where with the hiring process, I'm wondering if the expectation is going to change on how they hire these athletic trainers for these colleges. I'm sure there's going to be much more headhunting to come and take care of the assets rather than just a general open application process. Because there are good newly certified athletic trainers, but are you really going to put them in that position to take care of that $1 million asset?
Right. I was a graduate assistant fresh out of undergrad, and 2-year academic program, and I was handed the keys to the Arizona gymnastics program. Would LSU do that with Livy Dunn, she's like the second highest earning college athlete? I sure hope not, because I know I wasn't ready. She deserves someone who knows what the heck they're doing and not figuring it out as they go.
Well, back to the funding question, now at Baylor, and I'm going to assume that Baylor has a similar program to Pacific Lutheran University. That's where both Shelby and Austin got their bachelor's at. I am still on the list for, hey, you ought to donate to PLU. And one of the challenges is it's not specific enough. Their plea is not specific enough. So is it something that the athletic training or potentially through the auspices of the team, that you go to the folks who are actually doing the fundraising for the institution, specifically in schools, this is where it really makes sense to me, and say, hey, could we design a plea that specifically addresses, one, athletics, which is always good for pulling money into schools, but two, the AT side of it, the unsung heroes of who's gonna respond when they stop play.
Yeah.
Well, let's figure out how to get some money specifically for those folks.
Now, I won't speak for athletics, but I've pivoted to a career largely as an administrator. So I am the director of the Academy for Teaching and Learning. And we are in kind of a similar space where we've got an office suite, but our Center for Teaching and Learning, we basically go where the faculty need us to go. In my vision, we'll have a $20 million facility with flex labs and lots of different offerings. But I recognize that if that's going to become a reality, I've got to get real good with the development folks. And once I do, and once we have the facility, we can't afford to staff it with our current funding streams. And I will rely on and I'll lean on our administration to help come alongside that. But I'm not coming with an ask for X number of dollars to the administration. I think I have to make a compelling argument to our alumni and to folks that have a vested interest in what we're doing and get them on board with the vision. And I think a head athletic trainer or director of sports medicine or athletic healthcare or whatever, really it's tough because you're working so much. It's not like you have the time to become a development professional, but you really owe it to yourself and your staff to take that proactive approach to fundraising. Because NIL has shown us that if you can get in front of the right people with a compelling story, that they'll come alongside and support you. Another confound that a Baylor might have that UT Austin or A&M don't is we have 14,000 undergrads. A&M has 50, 60. They're graduating students at 4 or 5 times the clip and subsequently producing alumni at that pace. And so our living alumni base that are potential donors is never going to be what it is at a larger school. And if you look at Power 5 schools that are low enrollment, the Dukes, the Vanderbilts, there are a number of small. Gonzaga, I just saw, is joining Pac-12, I believe. I could be wrong on that. You might have to edit it. But the point is, these smaller schools, again, there's no salary cap. There's no attempt to financially make this an attempt at parity. So the programs that have either alumni that aren't as well off and wealthy or smaller or both, they'll continue to have not, while the haves will continue having more.
Well, but I think you hit on a specific point there. It comes down to sometimes the ability to communicate the passion for the program. In the book club, from the To the Bone book club, we're reading Chris Voss's book on negotiating. And in there, they have an example of exactly this situation where you had an individual who had identified themselves that they wanted to make a donation. And I think in this case, it was to the Girl Scouts. And so they would send the development people over there, and they would run over and they'd get out the top hat and the canes and the music and the tap shoes. And they would tell them everything that they were doing and why they should do it. And they couldn't get the buy-in. She wouldn't give the money. And she had self-identified as somebody who wanted to give money to this organization. And they finally got somebody who went and talked to them and allowed them to tell the Girl Scouts what she wanted the money to do. And so then she was willing to make the donation, not because this person did a better presentation, but because they were able to listen and say, yeah, okay, we can take that money and we can put it right into here. And that way it will do exactly what you want it to do. So again, that's why I'm saying if we could get, when you have time, talk to the development people about, hey, let's do some development specifically to support athletic training. And with that, obviously, when you're doing that marketing, is you're picking specific alumni, former athletes, ATs, support industries. I mean, we're all slapping on some rock tape from time to time. Let's make sure that rock tape has an opportunity to support and Johnson & Johnson, another massive company that I'm sure knows that they're going to be approached. Let's find out how to help them support the programs. Now, how about from your perspective, now that you've been successful in helping athletic trainers negotiate, what are some of the key tools that you think that they ought to be sharpening?
Well, that's a great question. I think you can never become proficient enough as a communicator. I've undergone public speaking training, and you might not be able to tell that from my interview, but just being able to articulate your vision. It's one thing to have an idea that I want to help people. I think most of us got into the field because we wanted to help people, and sports are cool. That's not a compelling story. If I can connect and share examples of lives that were changed because of the work I did, then that's a connection point. If I'm trying to convince my administration or a potential donor of the importance of an athletic trainer, I've got to be able to communicate that succinctly and clearly. I think it's also important in this day and age. More and more athletes are holding the cards, and they've got maybe some financial resources. We also know that student athletes become leaders. That's one of the pitches that the NCAA gives is, your Fortune 500 CEOs were frequently athletes, and no one knows what we do better than athletes. We're serving them. So cultivating, it's a long play, and I'm not saying I would ever cultivate a relationship with a patient in hopes that they would pay me back, but it can't hurt that I have a voice and that I have an ear with someone who 10, 15, 20 years down the road is a leader in their respective field. We haven't done a great job as a profession advocating for ourselves. Back to your point, we've kind of gladly embraced the B role. If we're going to continue to do that, then I feel like we need to load the wagons of the A people so that they can fight for us, because we've done a pretty crappy job of it.
Well, and that's it. You got to have A people who realize just how valuable your Bs are. I mean, what would Apple be without Steve Wozniak? It'd be a nice idea and a good sales pitch, but it wouldn't be much of a technology. So yeah, it's absolutely. Oh man, you had so much good stuff in that statement. I might have to go back and do little pop-ups. Here's a question on that. We have seen in some of the interviews we've done, we've seen the other ATs that have taken a similar path as you have. You start out spending the 80 hours on the sidelines, making sure everybody's being taken care of, and then you move either into administration or management. And one of the things that seemed to be working really well for the gentleman that we were interviewing is that along the way, he developed enough of a rapport with some of the athletes that he kept them as individual clients even after they had moved on, either to the next level in their sport or into other professions in life. And it seems to me with some of the, I have to make a disclaimer here, when Shelby learns a new technique, she comes home for vacation and practices on me. So when she got dry needling figured out, there was a vacation and some dry needling. And when there was the manipulation with the James Bond torture devices, yeah, she came home and she tried that on me. But some of those techniques and certifications that you achieve while you're training with the athletes can be moved into less athletic client bases. Yeah. As a senior, old, God, I'm not a young man anymore. How about that? We'll use that instead of old or senior. I've got knees that are starting to wear out from all the activity I did when I was young. I got, bone things that are happening. And those things that used to be for high performance athletes can be now moved to the treatment of people who are just trying to live. Yeah. And if you've got that trust relationship that you built on the sidelines, that can be a very long-term revenue stream from that individual.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of former colleagues who basically, one has left college practice and opened a fee-for-service type clinic. When I first got in athletic training, I distinctly remember my program director telling me two what turned out to be blatant lies. First, she said, by 2010, every high school in America will have a certified athletic trainer. We're not even close.
Missed.
Secondly, third-party reimbursement will happen for athletic trainers probably around that same time. Also never going to happen. So in my mind, I'm like, this field is awesome, and it's only going to continue to grow. The opportunities at the high school are going to grow. The opportunities in private clinics are going to grow. Neither of those fleshed out. So what we've seen instead, a lot of times health insurance is so problematic. Either people don't have it, or their copays are so high that they're basically paying cash for service anyway. So I think society has kind of gotten away from this idea that I don't have to pay anything for healthcare. They're used to pulling out their wallet. And so if I could have someone that worked with the LA Kiss a season ago and now they're going to help me, there's some affinity to that. People are attracted. Same reason that an orthopedic surgeon would say, the official ortho of the Oakland Raiders, Las Vegas Raiders. There's an attraction to that where General Joe or Susie Public wants to align with this healthcare professional who knows how to do things for elite athletes. Well, so I think that's opened a lane or an opportunity that didn't exist when I was a student.
And that goes exactly back to your point of the value question. Okay, so let's say you had stayed with the Raiders. Now, unfortunately, you'd be living in Vegas right now, so you may have dodged a bullet there. But if this guy is so good that the Raiders, who have a roster that is worth probably $1 billion, and they trust this guy, wow, that's the guy I want working on my funky little knee. Holy cow. So
or even more, my kid's funky little knee.
Absolutely, yeah. Because both my girls were way better athletes than I ever dreamed of being.
And we will spend dollars on our kids we would never think of parting with for ourselves.
Oh, so I can live with the pain, but my kid needs to be 100%.
Yeah, I mean, she's trying to get a scholarship. She's going to be on the next, whatever. Yeah, I mean, they're finding success with that model. I mean, club sports, and again, the resistance to this model has been lowered over time because of the proliferation of club sports and because of private hitting coaches for baseball or private pitching coaches. All of these sports are so hyper specialized that parents are used to searching out folks who will give them specialized instruction. This is just the natural progression of that. And I would argue it's more important because that's a whole nother podcast episode, why early sports specialization is bad. But there's nothing wrong with recovery and learning how to take care of your body. I mean, those are lifelong things that I can pour into a student athlete who might come to me for a few weeks and they can use that the rest of their life.
Oh, absolutely. And that's, it's getting that full basket of bundle of rights and basket of value. That's why when my kids were still in school, I was always, you know what? You need to take some business classes. Here's the deal. I made Shelby go to an investment class so she understood how the stock market worked. Now, it was a little embarrassing because her portfolio worked out better than mine, but we both got an A, so it was good. But yeah, it's going at it as you're a professional organization. You're professionals. You deal with life and death situations. Treat yourself as good as you treat your athletes. Make sure you've got the tools to be able to do what you need to do. Now, people want to check out this incendiary information that you've been putting out. Where can they go and find out more about you?
Well, that's on LinkedIn and Facebook. Happy to connect there. Toby J. Brooks is the LinkedIn handle. My podcast is called Becoming Undone. It's really about how setbacks and adversity can set us up for success. A lot of former athletes, successful business owners, Navy SEALs, entrepreneurs, all kinds of different folks. But it really was born out of my work as an AT, seeing athletes at their lowest of lows, feeling like their career was over and their identity was gone, and fighting through that, either returning to the field or finding success in a whole other walk of life. And to a certain, I really didn't make the connection until earlier today that like this whole talk about ATs finding themselves and either leaning in to what they're doing or finding another path, that's becoming undone too. Sometimes we have to fall apart before we can come together.
Yeah. Outstanding. Well, I think that's going to do it for To the Bone this time around. All right. And where can they check out your podcast?
My podcast is on all the major platforms. It's just becoming Undone. Also, undonepodcast.com. They're all housed there as well. So Apple, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all the normal places.
All right. And dinner, sir, what time on Saturday? Because I know everybody's going to just come by your place to talk to you in person.
I am in transition still. So we've got a house for sale in Lubbock. We are in a tiny apartment, so we don't have room to entertain anybody on Saturday.
All right, dang it. I love Texas because the roads are so smooth. We flew down there for an event in Austin, and I rented one of the Italian four-door touring sedans, and my wife was just doing really? I know you just watched that racing movie, but that does not mean you need to drive the Alpha like the racing movie. It's like, these roads are so smooth, you can drive.
I've got a little lowered Honda Civic as my
yeah.
daily driver, and it scrapes everywhere. The roads aren't as flat as I would like them to be, I can tell you that.
Well, come to Alaska. We'll let you drive around for a couple of days, and you'll be like, I am loving the amount of asphalt that it doesn't have holes in it. All right, guys, that'll do it for this time on To the Bone. We'll see you next time right here.
Appreciate you.
That's it for today's episode of To the Bone. I hope we've sparked some new thoughts, challenged your perspectives, or simply reminded you to dig a little deeper. Remember, life isn't just about what's on the surface. Sometimes you've got to cut deeper and get to the bone of what really matters. To the Bone podcast is a product of Daily LLC. It is hosted and produced by Shelby Daly, ATC, and Randy Daly. No clinical decision-making should be based solely on one source. While care is taken to ensure accuracy, factual errors can be present. For more on the show, visit www.tothebonepodcast.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Get involved in the conversation. You can find us at www.tothebonepodcast.com. Drop us topic suggestions or be a potential guest. We're all about connecting with you, our listeners. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and keep cutting deep.